Jack the Ripper was an unidentified serial killer active in and around the Whitechapel area of London in 1888. Attacks attributed to Jack the Ripper involved female prostitutes who lived and worked in the slums of the East End of London. Their throats were cut prior to horrific abdominal mutilations. The removal of internal organs from at least 3 of the victims led to proposals that the killer had some kind of anatomical or surgical knowledge, possibly even a butcher. In the mid-19th century, Britain experienced an influx of immigrants who swelled the populations of the major cities, including the East End of London. The area of Whitechapel in London's East End became increasingly overcrowded, with the population increasing to approximately 80,000 by 1888. Work and housing conditions worsened, and 55% of children born in the East End died before they were 5 years old. Robbery, violence, and alcohol dependency were commonplace, and the poverty drove many women to prostitution to survive on a daily basis. In October 1888, London's Metropolitan Police Service estimated that there were 62 brothels and 1,200 women working as prostitutes in Whitechapel. Approximately 8,500 people resided in the 233 common lodging houses within Whitechapel every night. The nightly cost of sleeping in one of these lodging houses was 4 shillings for a single bed. But for those even less fortunate, you could sleep slumped over a length of rope, which was literally just stretched across the bedrooms of these houses, and this would cost you 2 shillings for adults or children. The large number of attacks against women in the East End during this time adds uncertainty to how many victims were actually murdered by the same individual, Jack the Ripper. "11 separate murders, spanning from the 3rd of April 1888 to the 13th of February 1891, were included in a London Metropolitan Police Service investigation and were known collectively as the Whitechapel Murders. Opinions vary to this day as to whether all 11 murders should be linked to the same culprit, but 5 of the 11 Whitechapel murders are widely believed to be the work of Jack the Ripper. Most experts point to deep slash wounds to the throat, followed by extensive abdominal and genital area mutilation, the removal of internal organs, and facial mutilations as the distinctive features of Ripper's MO. In this video, we will look at these 5 victims. However, please do look out for my further video in which we'll take a look at the other 6 victims and the circumstances surrounding them. The 5 known Ripper victims were Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. All 5 women were desperately poor and homeless at the time of their deaths. The first, Mary Ann Nichols, often referred to in life as Polly, was discovered at about 3:40 a.m. on Friday the 31st of August 1888 in Bucks Row, Whitechapel. Nichols had last been seen alive approximately 1 hour before the discovery of her body by a friend walking in the direction of Whitechapel Road. Her throat was severed by 2 deep cuts, one of which went completely down to the vertebrae. Her vagina had been stabbed twice, and the lower part of her abdomen was partly ripped open, causing her bowels to protrude. 1 week later, on Saturday the 8th of September 1888, The body of Annie Chapman was discovered at approximately 6 a.m. in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street, Spitalfields. As in the case of Mary Ann Nichols, her throat was severed by 2 deep cuts. Her abdomen had been cut entirely open, and bizarrely, a section of the flesh from her stomach had been placed upon her left shoulder, and another section of skin, flesh, and her small intestines had been placed above her right shoulder. In Chapman's autopsy, it was also revealed that her uterus, sections of her bladder, and her vagina had been removed. At the inquest into Chapman's murder, a witness described having seen Chapman standing outside 29 Hanbury Street at around 5:30 a.m. She was in the company of a dark-haired man wearing a brown deerstalker hat and a dark overcoat. According to the eyewitness, the man had asked Chapman the question, "Will you?" to which Chapman had replied, "Yes." Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were both killed in the early morning hours of Sunday, the 30th of September, 1888. Stride's body was discovered at approximately 1 a.m. in Dutfield's yard off Berner Street in Whitechapel. The cause of death was a single clear-cut incision measuring 6 inches across her neck, which had severed her left artery and her trachea. The absence of any further mutilations to her body had led to uncertainty as to whether Stride's murder was indeed committed by the Ripper, or whether he was interrupted during the attack. Eddowes' body was found in Mitre Square in the City of London, 3/4 of an hour after the discovery of the body of Elizabeth Stride. Her throat was severed and her abdomen ripped open, with her intestines placed again over her right shoulder. The left kidney and the major part of her uterus had been removed, and her face had been disfigured, her nose severed, her cheeks slashed, and cuts measuring 1/4 of an inch and 1/2 an inch respectively, vertically incised through each of her eyelids. Triangle-shaped incision had also been carved upon each of her cheeks, and a section of her right ear removed. A local cigarette salesman named Joseph Lawend had passed through the square with 2 friends shortly before the murder. He described seeing a fair-haired man of shabby appearance with a woman who may have been Eddowes. The murders of Stride and Eddowes ultimately became known as the double event. The extensively mutilated and disemboweled body of Mary Jane Kelly was discovered lying on the bed in a single room at 13 Miller's Court off Dorset Street, Spitalfields, at 10:45 a.m. on Friday, the 9th of November, 1888. Her face had been cut beyond all recognition, her throat severed down to the spine, and the abdomen almost emptied of all its organs. Her uterus, kidneys, and 1 breast had been placed beneath her head. Other organs from her body were placed beside her foot and about the bed, and sections of her abdomen and thighs upon a bedside table. Her heart was also missing from the crime scene. Each of the 5 murders were perpetrated at night, on or close to the weekend, and close to the end of the month. The mutilations became increasingly severe as the series of murders proceeded, except for that of Stride, whose attacker may have been interrupted. Some researchers have suggested that while some of the murders were undoubtedly the work of a single killer, only 3 of the cases, that of Nichols, Chapman and Eddowes, can definitely be linked to the same perpetrator. But less certainty exists as to whether Stride and Kelly were also murdered by the same individual. It is thought by some that the later killings could have been committed by a copycat killer, emulating what they'd seen through the media. Sadly, the vast majority of the City of London police files relating to their investigation were destroyed in the Blitz. However, the surviving files allow a detailed view of investigative procedures in the Victorian era. A large team of policemen conducted house-to-house inquiries throughout Whitechapel. Forensic materials collected and examined. Suspects were identified, traced, and either examined more closely or eliminated from the inquiry altogether. Butchers, slaughterers, surgeons, and physicians were suspected because of the manner of the mutilations. Alibis of local butchers and slaughterers were investigated, with the result that they were eliminated from the inquiry. A report from a police inspector at the time confirms that 76 butchers were visited. In September 1888, a group of volunteer citizens in London's East End formed the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. They patrolled the streets looking for suspicious characters, partly because of dissatisfaction with the failure of police to apprehend the perpetrator, but also because some members were concerned that the murders were affecting their business. Over the course of the Whitechapel murders, the police, newspapers, and other individuals received hundreds of letters regarding the case. Some letters were well-intentioned offers of advice as to how to catch the killer, but the vast majority were either hoaxes or generally useless. Hundreds of letters claimed to have been written by the killer himself, but only 3 of these in particular stood out: the Dear Boss letter, the Saucy Jack postcard, and the From Hell letter. The Dear Boss letter, dated 25th of September, was received that day by the Central News Agency and was forwarded to Scotland Yard on the 29th of September. Initially, it was considered a hoax, but when Eddowes was found 3 days after with a section of one ear cut, the promise of the letter's author gained attention. The name Jack the Ripper was first used in this letter and gained worldwide notoriety after its publication. The Saucy Jack postcard was received 1st of October 1888 by the Central News Agency. The handwriting was similar to the Dear Boss letter and mentioned the murders committed on 30th of September, which the author refers to by writing the double event. It's been argued that the postcard must have been posted before the murders were publicised, making it unlikely to be a hoax, as how would anyone have known knowledge of the crime? The From Hell letter was received by George Lusk, leader of the Whitechapel Committee, on 16th of October 1888. The letter came in a small box in which Lusk discovered half of a human kidney, preserved in ethanol. Eddowes' left kidney had been removed by a killer, and the writer claimed that he fried and ate the missing half. There is some disagreement over the kidney. Some contend that it belonged to Eddowes, while others argue that it was just a macabre practical joke. However, the kidney was examined by a doctor who determined that it was human and it was from the left side. Ultimately, the mystery of Jack the Ripper was never solved, and whilst many have speculated about who the Ripper was, he ultimately remained at large. Sadly, he was never punished for his horrific crimes, and the truly awful things he did to his poor victims. There are countless men who were in the spotlight and considered suspects at the time, and I'll be looking at those men in more detail in an upcoming video. However, that's it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please do check out my others and also consider subscribing. Thank you.